Now, as you know, I am chatting to Jennifer, who is the CEO and Head of Purpose at Modern People. Modern People is Australia's first purpose-driven strategic consulting, human resources and human optimization company. They're currently redefining the way organizations source, lead, and inspire their leaders and teams using a unique purpose-driven framework as a part of their process. They believe that when companies realize the purpose of every employee and truly support them in their pursuits, that is the secret to longevity in business. And it's also exactly why I have asked Jennifer to join us today. So again, everyone who's here today, thank you so much for joining us. And Jennifer, I'll let you take it from there.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm not sure how many of you saw the first webinar that we did for Victory officers around finding and connecting to your new purpose. So if you have watched our keynote before, then welcome back and thank you so much for joining us for the second time. And if not, well, welcome for the first time. So that was a great intro by Kate. About who we are and what we do, but essentially, you know, we exist. Our why is to connect people with purpose, and we do that through our various programs and service streams around human resources, human optimization, and leadership. So I'm here today to talk to you about leadership and, in particular, leaders of the future. So before we get started today, there are going to be a couple of activities throughout this webinar. So I'd encourage you, if you don't have a pen and paper in front of you, we're going old school, if you could go and grab some pens and pieces of paper so we can write down and go through the activities. It's nothing too strenuous or difficult, but it's all about the self-awareness piece, which is an essential tool in being a purposeful leader. So we will start by, I think it's important to really take a little bit of a snapshot at our current world, and we're calling it the new world. You know, what are we embarking on now post-COVID? So we're in the recovery phase, and a lot of commentary is around it being this next and this new and world and what it's going to look like. So what does it look like? So first of all, we are embracing technology and virtual workspaces. So what does this mean? It means that we've been in a situation where we've been confined to our homes, we can be confined to virtual spaces, and we're no longer in an open plan workspace, we're no longer interacting with our colleagues. And so what does that mean? It means that we have become a little more insular. And so with that comes a lot of flexibility, there comes a lot of disconnection, but then there can also be some beautiful things and some connections to our values and what's most important in life and what our unique purpose is. So with that, we need to adapt. So the need for adaptability is more important now than ever. Transparency, that's expected. So what does that mean? Transparency in the business world, and in your personal life, it's authenticity. So these are the qualities that we need to succeed as a leader moving forward, and we also need to succeed as an individual in our life. Organisations have been tested, and resilience will be essential. So for those of you who have been around through the GFC, there was a lot of tout before the GFC, and I remember sort of coming up through the ranks in my 20s and my 30s, and it was very much unless you've been through a recession, we talk about the recession of 89 and 90 and how businesses were started in that time, and then we came through the GFC, and now this is the new crisis. And I guess what's so unique about this crisis is that in the GFC, it was financially driven. In this time, in COVID, it's humanitarian. It's a crisis where individuals have been affected. This is outside our control. It's more than finance and money. You know, one thing we always say is that money is not meaning. Money provides a lifestyle, but it's purpose and making a contribution that provides meaning. And that is what is important in the new world. Mark Twain, famous quote, "The two most important days of your life, the day you were born and the day you find out why." So through my history, so 14 years I operated a national HR, executive search and recruitment firm. We consulted to big businesses all around the country. We had contracts with the likes of your Rio Tinto, with Multiplex. We worked within the small to medium-sized business. We worked with large financial organisations, state government tenders and contracts, the airports around the country. And within that time of consulting, what I noticed the most and the biggest challenge that leaders faced was not within their organisation. It was them individually. It was them burning out or almost reaching a state of burnout. And that by far was the most common challenge that I saw in business and in consulting. And through that, it caused them to lose sense of their purpose or meaning, or because they were constantly on this wheel, they were burning the candle at both ends. They were pushing and pushing and pushing. And whilst motivation and extrinsic rewards, they provide that push, what pulls you is that meaning and that purpose. And the leaders were disconnected from their purpose and their meaning, and they were heading for burnout. And what that meant is that they were suffering anxiety, they were suffering from feelings of depression, some from feelings of worthlessness, and yet they felt shame, so much shame around that. They weren't able to come to the office and talk about it. They would bottle it up inside and it would come out and it would manifest in other ways. Or they would become autocratic, they would become controlling and micromanaging. I mean, I'm sure if you think back into your career and coming up through the ranks in your different organisations and your businesses, I'm sure you could think of many leaders over your lifetime and your career that have been autocratic in their nature or have been controlling or micromanagers. And often it's because we're unaware of that leader's personal journey and what they're going through and how they're so disconnected from themselves and their lack of and their self-awareness, and that affects their everyday life. The anxiety that they feel, one of the most contagious feelings and emotions is anxiety. And when a leader is in that state, in that heightened state, that filters through the entire organisation, through the different teams and the groups that they're a part of. So purpose in leadership. Everything we do has a reason for existence, and it's bigger than us. So when we focus and we can communicate on what that reason is, we compel others. A perfect example, Steve Jobs. What was his purpose and his vision? To make a contribution to the world by making tools for the mind that advance humankind. That is probably one of the most powerful leaders that we can think of in the modern world. And his commitment to a greater cause inspired not only his organisation, but it inspired the world. Some of the most extraordinary people in the world are the ones that do ordinary things with an extraordinary purpose. And that purpose, in that perspective, is rooted in purpose. This brings to mind a story of the janitor in NASA. And I'm sure you've heard this story before, but when JFK visited NASA, unbeknownst to him, he spoke to a man, an employee of NASA, and he said, what do you do here? To which he replied, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. And that greater cause, that commitment to that cause is what drove him and what gave him a sense of meaning and purpose. So adopting a purposeful approach requires a radical change in our thinking. In 2018, 33 of the top 50 performing companies in Australia had a purpose statement or has a purpose statement. But my question is, how many of those 33 companies are living and breathing their purpose in their everyday life, in their everyday operations? If we say that an organisation's culture is based around the vision, the mission, the values, the thinking, the behaviour, and then its actions. So if you think of it in a three-step Venn diagram, and when you cultivate that and when you join that, that is the organisational's culture. Well, how do you as an organisation, if you're working for yourself, if you're a consultant, how are you living and breathing that in the work that you're doing and how you're delivering that to your clients? If you're a leader within a larger organization, how are you embodying that as a leader, and how are you then instilling that and inspiring your teams and other leaders within your organization to live that purpose? So there's many different ways that we can do this. So for us, we feel that the connection to humanity and the connection to us as people, as individuals, has been lost in a lot of modern leadership techniques and methodologies. We've been so focused on processes and systemizing things and effectiveness and efficiencies and coming up with agile models and lean models and documenting and processing things that we've lost that connection to humanity, to individuals. At the end of every value chain is a person, and we're human beings, and we are driven by emotion and feeling. And to say that I leave my personal life at home and I leave my work life at work and that the two don't interchange is a fallacy, because we are ultimately feeling human beings. So our leadership model for a purposeful leader, we've come up with 5 steps across people: purpose, empathy, openness, perspective, leverage, and empowerment. And they're all essential skills to be learned and tools to have to become a purposeful leader. So like with everything that we do, it starts with purpose. That is your foundation. So that lays the base to an effective and a purposeful leader. Then we move on to empathy. And empathy is being able to understand how the other person is feeling. So as a leader, having that understanding, that compassion, that creates the connectedness, that brings back the humanity. Openness, it's the communication. It's how we connect with others. How open you are as an individual is how open you'll be as a leader, and how you'll inspire and how you'll connect to your team and to your stakeholders. Perspective, how you view the world. What is your view on the world? Leverage. Now, leverage is an interesting one because it can have a slightly negative connotation to it, as in perhaps you might be leveraging something and you might be underhandedly manipulating something. But leverage, it depends on the intention. So is your intention one of self-interest, or is your intention one of self-transcendence? So something that's outside of your own personal gain. And if you have that outward view, then an intention, then the leverage is positive. And lastly, empowerment. How are you using all of these skills and tools within our people model to then empower your teams? So, activity time. So I know that some of you would have, and maybe all of you have completed Myers and Briggs testing over time, and that's wonderful. What we're going to do today is a very, very simple little tool, which is to identify, because before you can have perspective in an organisation and a perspective as a leader for your teams, you need to have perspective on yourself. So we need to know, okay, well, what type of leader are you? And that's based on personality traits. So we've got, if you can just grab a piece of paper now, and we're going to ask a couple of questions. And then if you can just write down an E or an I next to what you think you are. Now, of course, when you read these statements up on the screen, you might identify, like most people, it's completely normal to identify with both. So what we'd like you to do is really just have a look at both statements. So take time to read the statements. I'll read them out, and I'll also give you some time to reflect to see which of the two statements do you think that you identify the most with. So there's quite a few little statements within each paragraph. So perhaps if you might identify with one in one statement, but then in 2 or 3 in the statement above, then you'd go with the one above. There is no right or wrong answer. So this is a reflection of your own uniqueness and your personality. So write a letter E down on your page if you think you are talkative and outgoing, even with people, you like the workplace to move quickly, you enjoy being the centre of attention, or maybe you actually don't enjoy being the centre of attention, but you just like attention, you don't mind it, you brainstorm with others out aloud, you love good workshops, and communication is a strength of yours. So if that's you, if you could write a letter E down on your piece of paper. And with this, it's very simple. We're only writing 4 letters down. So just make sure there's enough space on your page just to write 4 consecutive letters down. Then the second is if you think you're more of a private personality. So if you like to take time to make decisions, weigh up the different options, you tend to plan in your head and you organise ahead of time, you're a keen observer, you probably prefer to email your ideas than perhaps to stand up and present in a room. So if you identify with more statements within that paragraph, then please write an I down. The next one. So this will be the next consecutive letter. So the first letter will either be an E or an I, and the second letter you'll either be an S or an N. So an S is you pay attention to details. So perhaps you like yourself to being a more detail-orientated person, or if you're not sure in yourself, think back to your last performance reviews or your client reviews. Has anyone described you as being a detail-orientated person before? And if that's kind of come up in your performance reviews previously, then we would say yes, you identify more with an S. So you like practical ideas, you like facts and figures, you think of things literally. So if any of those things resonate with you, write an S. Or if you feel that you're more imaginative, so in the possibilities of how things could be, and you notice the big picture, you notice how things connect. You enjoy ideas and you like things in a figurative sense, so not so literal, so things in a more imaginative sense, a poetic way maybe. So if you, and again, you might identify with things in both, because I certainly do, you know, sometimes I think, yeah, I'm quite a literal person. And other times I think, yeah, actually, but I'm a big picture person and I enjoy concepts and ideas. And so, but then I do like details. So I look at both of those statements and think, yeah, actually, I'm probably a little bit of both. But there's always one that you feel that there's a little bit more alignment for. So that's the one that I'd like you to write an S or an N. Next letter. If you think that perhaps you make decisions in a more impersonal way, maybe you use more logical reasoning, you value things like justice, fairness, you enjoy a good debate. You know, it's, we say finding flaws in an argument, but that's, you know, that could be a very positive thing because you have that analytical mind, critical thinking. If you're that type of person and you like a good debate, you use logical reasoning, then I'd encourage you to write a T down. Alternatively, if you think that you base your decisions more on your personal values and how your actions affect others, you value harmony, forgiveness, you like to please others, you point out the best in other people, you could be described as warm and empathetic, you're a more feeling type person. And again, you know, I sort of look at both those statements and honestly, I'm like, yeah, I can identify with both. I think that, yes, I can be logical in the way that I view things. I do like a good debate, but I also value harmony and forgiveness and have been described by a lot of my colleagues and friends as being warm and empathetic. So I do identify with a bit of both, but there's always one, again, that you feel a little more aligned with, and that's the one that I'd urge you to write down. So I'll give you a few more moments just to think about this. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. Okay, and the last letter. There's only a four-letter activity. So very, very simple. If you prefer to have matters settled. So if you like the idea of rules and deadlines, you feel that they should be respected, you prefer to have detailed step-by-step instructions, you like plans, you like to kind of know what you're getting into, like sort of the bit of the heads up before you commit to anything. If you feel you identify with that statement or those series of statements more, then write down a J. If you kind of prefer to keep your options open, you see rules as being deadlines. And you see rules and deadlines as being more flexible. You like to improvise and make things up as you go. Perhaps your friends or your previous colleagues or your husband or your wife has likened you to being spontaneous. So you like surprises, you like the unknown, you like new situations. So what do you identify with more? And it's okay if you identify with both paragraphs, but what do you think? And maybe if you even think back to a situation, so think about some current situations. So your most recent feedback, your employee feedback. So if you're working for an organisation and you've had some 360 feedback from your team, your managers, or if you're a consultant, you work on your own, or you are an employer and you've had some feedback from, say, your clients, your stakeholders. It could be external stakeholders, different membership organisations that you work for, industry partners. Perhaps it could be a colleague at another industry event, and just think of how they would describe you and think of some of the feedback that they've given you and whether or not spontaneity is in there, or whether or not you've really honoured a rule or a deadline. And think about this across your personal and your work life as well. This isn't just dedicated to you as a leader in the work sense. You can be a leader in life. You know, we're all innately leading, and we're all part of different communities and organisations. So you may not be a leader in a work sense, as in, you know, having staff reporting to you, but you may be a leader in, say, a sporting organisation that you're part of, a different membership organisation you're part of. You might volunteer at your child's school or different committees. And so perhaps you might be the chair of one of those organisations or committees, in which case you're still leading. So if you think about it in that sense, in that context, and you think, okay, well, what was the feedback that I've been given in those times and those scenarios, and how would I be described, and how would I think of myself in those situations? Okay, now the testing time. So we're just dropping into the chat for you now a PDF document. And the PDF document has these different combinations here. So these are all the possible outcomes and combinations of our little activity, our little exercise. So this might be familiar to some of you if you've done the Myers-Briggs 16 personalities test. And of course, they ask you many more questions to really identify what your answers are and your responses are. So this is a very quick way of us doing it, and it's just for the purpose of this particular webinar or workshop that we're doing, so we can identify what kind of leader you are, so then you can use that as your strength to develop and empower your teams. So these are the different combinations. So I'll give you a few moments so you can open and download that PDF document. and have a look at what your combination is. Now, if there's anyone who isn't able to access the PDF for any particular reason, would you mind just popping a little comment in the chat box? And my colleague Annie can send that through to you or make sure that you've got it, because it's important that you have the document so you can see what your traits are. Everyone's good? Yep, you're all good. That's fantastic. Great. No tech issues. I love that. All right. So what I thought I'll do is I'll just describe you what mine is. So I am an ENFJ. So I'll explain to you what that is. So the I guess the title is the teacher. Which is funny that I'm hosting a webinar. But starting with E, so E is extrovert. So the E stands for extrovert and the I is an introvert. So I think we all know exactly what an extrovert or introvert is. And so this is a classification, I guess, that you're born with. It's innate within you. So it's not something that you can perhaps develop over time. It's not a skill to be learnt. Generally speaking, in psychological terms, you are an extrovert or an introvert. And again, neither's right or wrong, and there's beautiful traits to both. But myself as an extrovert, I would describe as being outgoing, talkative. I like to be in fast-paced environments. I like to work out loud and flush ideas out and brainstorm. So I love people and the interaction with people. So that's the main qualities of an extrovert. The second is N. So this is intuition. So you could either be a sensing personality or an intuitive personality, which is N. So as an intuitive personality, I like to imagine what the possibilities could be. I look at the big picture. Of course, intuition leads me. Often we're classified as more the feelers. I like ideas and concepts. I like things to be described in a figurative or a poetic way. So that's an intuitive, the N classification. Now, if you were an S, a sensing person, you're more a realist. You like to focus on the reality of how things are. You pay attention to concrete facts and details. You like to describe things in a literal way. And it's really interesting because sharing a personal story, my husband and I were almost like the opposite. So whereas he's an introvert, I'm an extrovert, he's an introvert. I'm intuitive, he's sensing. He's definitely the practical person. So interesting, the yin and the yang. And maybe have a think about your partner, if you have one, your partner or your previous partner. If you don't have one now, have a reflective. Take some time to go back in reflection and have a look and see what your previous partner was and how that interacts. Then the third one is thinking or feeling. So I'm an F. So I base my decisions on personal values, how my actions affect others. I value harmony, forgiveness. I'm a people pleaser, the best possible way, I hope. And I could be described as being warm and empathetic. So that's the feeler. Now these, I believe that in terms of thinking and feeling, it's something that can be developed over time. That can be skills and it can be the lifestyle that you have, the environment around you, education, if you go back to study. These things can all affect outcomes. So the personality profile now, things like an extrovert, introvert, that never changes. And generally sensing versus intuitiveness, that one's difficult as well. It tends to be innate in you. But these next two, the final two, are things that are skills that can be learned and developed over time or grown over time. You know, it could be, if you're a thinker, you might go through a spiritual type revelation, and then you could turn into more a feeler. Or you could have been raised as more of a feeler, and then you do some further education and practicality to move you more into the thinking space. So that's it's all possible, and everyone's journey is different. So again, no right or no wrong. And then the last one is J or P. So judging or perceiving. So I'm a J, judging, and sometimes this gets a little bit of a negative connotation to it as well. It's like, oh, because judging has the connotation of being somebody who, I mean, no one likes to describe themselves as being judgmental, right? But judging in a way can be positive, because it's not actually judging in a negative way, it's organisation. You know, what your organisational skills are. Do you like processes? Do you like to have matters settled? Or do you like to leave things more ambiguous? If you are, then you're more a P, a perceiving personality. So if you like rules and you like deadlines, you like a plan, you like to have things and have that sense of certainty, and bringing that into your work life or in your personal life, then you're more a J. If you like more spontaneity and you like new situations and you like to keep your options open, then you're more a P. So now we've got the perspective model, and I guess how we're bringing this all together. So we like to use the iceberg model because it's really the classic of what's underneath that surface. And so who you are as a leader and the perspective that you have defines what type of leader that you'll be and what shapes that perspective. So as we all know, perspective is shaped by experiences, but what does that mean? Let's go deeper. So it's experiences with the past mentors that you've had. It's experiences within the different leadership styles that you've worked under. So in a business sense, if you think back to, well, early on in my career, who were my main mentors? Who were my main leadership mentors in a work sense? And who were my main life mentors? Now, of course, we always have our parents as mentors, so father figure and mother figure, or even if you didn't have your birth parents, there would be other role models that have taken on that parental figure. So think back to who they were and how they've impacted your perspective and your journey in life. So that can be in a career sense, in an organisational sense, and it can also be in a personal sense. So if I think of myself, and I guess my leadership style, it's changed dramatically over the years. You know, if I think back to when I first started my career in my early 20s, and I came up through and I was working in marketing, and then I went and worked in HR. I joined a HR consulting company, and back then, you know, we're looking at 15, 20 years ago, it was the leadership style was quite autocratic. It was from the school of hard knocks. You know, women back then were very much in a man's world. And particularly in the HR world, we were going in and we were consulting to different boards and senior management. We were recruiting. We would often walk into a boardroom just full of men. And so the leadership style and the mentor that I had very early on in my career was exactly that. She was a hardened woman. She was a woman who came from the 80s style and the 90s style of management. You know, that armoured approach, you know, where the defences were up and we were constantly going into battle, because she experienced having to fight and claw her way through her career to get to the place that she had got. And that shaped her into the type of leader that she was. And I guess in that time, in that time in the world, women needed to be harder. And if a woman showed vulnerability, then that was taken as a sign of weakness. And so leadership styles back then were hardened and they were armoured and closed. And so that being one of my first mentors as a young, impressionable 20-something-year-old girl wanting to find her career and her place in the world, you know, that really shaped who I was. And for the most part of my 20s, I first had a team of one, and then it went up to 6 that I led and I managed at the time, and I was 25. And so I drew from those principles, those hardened principles. And to that, I guess the biggest learning experience for me as a leader was learning that worked for a short term, because again, that motivation, it was that pushing strategy. It was that, you know, let's push through, let's get through team, let's meet these metrics and KPIs. And it was very numbers focused, and we can do this together and we can push through. And absolutely that worked, you know, through that period. And we went into the boom, the resources boom that we had. And absolutely, you know, there was just contracts just happening, and we were winning tenders, and placements were being made, and consulting contracts, and, you know, finances and money was abundant. But what started happening with my team, and then also with myself personally, is that we did start to burn out. We started to lose steam, because that type of push and that drive will only get you so far. Because if you're not balancing on the other side, on the personal side, and what gives you energy, brings you energy and well-being, and in a world where it's money and number centric, not balancing that out with stillness and mindfulness and well-being, not having that balance on the other side, because again, they're seen as signs of weakness. If you bring a sense of spirituality or a sense of being into a corporate scenario, it's so far from the metrics and the models and the KPIs that it's seen as has no relevance. But in actual fact, it's the opposite, because without that, it's unsustainable long term. And throughout my career, over that 10-year period where we were working at the half pace, we were churning over team members and young individuals that would come, and it would be so full of energy and so full of passion and drive, and wanted to make a change and wanted to make a difference and wanted to connect individuals to their careers, and wanting to bring that sense of purpose into the world, would come, and they would work, and they would do a couple of years and would work long hours and work till 6, 7 o'clock at night. And absolutely that continued for a year or two, until they would come in at some point and say, I'm suffering anxiety, or I'm feeling exhausted, or I don't think I can do this anymore. Or they might not even have that sense of awareness. They would just start getting physically ill, because what that does is that mental struggle and challenge, and that constant, the adrenal glands firing and the cortisol firing, it's draining, and the physical body can only take so much. And so then what I started seeing with some of our employees was that then they would just start taking more and more sick days, and they would physically be sick. It manifested to their body in a way that they were just, their immune system was so low that they were constantly getting sick. And they would leave, not because they wanted to leave or they didn't enjoy the job, they would leave because they physically couldn't do it, and yet hadn't had that awareness why. And so part of our programs and what we teach is that vulnerability is your most important tool. It's the greatest strength. It's the most accurate measurement of courage, is that vulnerability, that connection to self, tuning into that intuition, being brave, being open, not being afraid to have those hard conversations. That is what makes a strong leader, a leader that's worthy of following, a leader who has a commitment to a greater cause beyond themselves and beyond the self-interest of their organisation. That is what makes a purposeful leader and a human leader. So authentic leadership, what does that look like? So some of the traits of authentic leaders: they're self-aware, they're genuine, They're mission driven. They're focused on results. They lead with their heart, not just their minds. And they have the long-term perspective always at the forefront of what they do. So I'd like another little activity now is if you can just write down, it's a bit of a reflective activities, if you can write down your early on in your career, think back to the first job that you had, the first meaningful job that you had. What was your mentor like? What was your leader like? Write down the qualities and the traits that that leader had that either inspired you or didn't. So when we say didn't, it's what traits did they have that you felt weren't aligned with. Because whilst it's important to recognise the positives, it's also important to recognise the negatives to see what you don't identify with as a leader. What not to be is often an easy way. So you can have a think back to your first job, first meaningful job, and who your first mentor was. Write down what you enjoyed about them and what you didn't. Okay, now I'd like you to think about your current role. So if you are in an organisation and you have a leader or if you're actually a leader yourself, you can do this two ways depending on whether or not you're employed or whether or not you're self-employed. But we'll start if you're employed. Think about your current leader and what it is about them that inspires you, what you enjoy about their leadership. What are those things that you identify with and that you align with? So if you could write down those different qualities in your current leader. Now, if you are self-employed, then if you can think of it in a different context. So if you're self-employed and it's just yourself, or you're a sole trader and you don't have anyone that you're leading, then what about the community organisations you're part of? Or what about the boards that you are part of? Are you part of any volunteering organisations? We mentioned previously your schooling, your children. If there's any organisations where it could be on the sporting field, you could be part of a team. You could be a chair or you could be a captain, you could be, so anywhere where you are a leader. If you don't identify with any of those things, are you a leader at home, in your home life? That's one that we don't really think of and we don't give a lot of credit to. Leadership doesn't necessarily mean of a large group of people. It could just be in your own family unit, your own family home. How are you leading and inspiring your own family, your own children, your partner? So there's many different contexts and ways that you can identify. So if you are a leader, then you write down some of the qualities that you feel you have in a positive way to bring to a leadership role. And then perhaps if you're really honest with yourself, in the second column, you can write, well, what are those, let's call them the ugly, the nasty traits that rear their little head every now and again. The things, the habits that have been ingrained in you perhaps from childhood, growing up? What are those traits? Let's get really honest and raw here with yourself and write down what are those things that you don't like. And those things generally come out when you're in a fight or flight response. So when you're in periods of stress, duress, long periods of stress or anxiety, it's often in those times where the knee-jerk reaction comes out, and that is those unhealthy habits or those qualities in yourself that aren't really living true to who you are, but under duress, they come out. So maybe write those down. And so what I'd like you to do is have a look at the different columns that you've got. So you should have 4 columns. So you've got your very, very first meaningful role, and you've got your current role. And you'll have the positives and the negatives for each, so in the 4 columns. So what I'd like you to do is now to compare both current and previous and have a look at the differences. What's changed from your very first meaningful role all those years ago? Maybe it's not really all those years ago. If you haven't been working for that long, that's okay too. But these exercises are always great to see where you've been, how far you've come. So what are some of the similarities or the differences? Now, if anybody wants to share anything on the chat box and would like to share what they see, your perception of previous versus current, be happy to share that. But that's okay if you're wanting to do this in self-reflection and in privacy, then that's okay too. Like any personal development and growth, it's what you put in. And so the final part of this activity, if you haven't already guessed, is I'd like you to now project into the future. I'd like you now to look where you've come from and have a look to see that very first leader, the current leader that you are or that you are under, and then the future leader. Now, I'd like you to project, if you're an employee currently and you don't have a team and you're not leading anyone, I'd like you to project knowing what you don't like about your previous leadership style and your current, and being really honest with yourself, to then saying, okay, I'm owning who I am, but who do I want to become? And I'd like you to write down all those qualities and traits and maybe some skills. Maybe we do a gap analysis here of the skills that you would like to have as a leader in the future. And I'd like you to write down all of those things. Now we've got a little equation here that we've created. But in a purposeful leader, in a human leader, courage, integrity, trustworthiness, they're all qualities which we believe and which we've seen over the many years of consulting are essential to being a strong, brave, courageous, purposeful leader. But at the end of the day, we need to acknowledge that as human beings, there is a selfish nature to us. Self-interest does come into play. And whilst as human beings, we're hardwired for altruism, self-interest does rear its little ugly head every now and again. And so it's important to not only embrace it, but own that, and know that no matter how much we invest in courage and integrity, how strong how brave we are as leaders, how open we are as leaders, how much we value integrity and how high our moral standards are, how long we build trust with our teams, with our stakeholders, with our clients, within our organisations, that self-interest will always rear its ugly little head at some point. And so having that awareness and owning what that is and being aware of what those triggers are, as I said before, it's often when we're in states of high anxiety, high stress, deadlines, the fight or flight response comes in, that those self-interest qualities emerge. But as an authentic leader, it's not about hiding and bottling them down. It's about owning what they are, acknowledging them, letting them go, learning from it, and moving on. So by really embracing that, we can then embody what an authentic leader is. Now, there's a lot of talk about courageous leadership. And what is it? Well, what I love about it, it's derived from the Latin word meaning the heart. So to be courageous is to speak and act from your heart. And there's a wonderful quote from Manoj Shafiq, which you've all heard, the director of London School of Economics, that jobs of the past were about muscles, jobs of now were about the brains, but in the future, they'll be about the heart. Now, she said that in 2018, so we are in the future. So we are now about the heart. And you can see that post-COVID. The way that the business world has come together, the commercial world has come together from all edges of the globe. We've got organisations, large international EPCM engineering companies, mining companies, which are coming together with their competitors. As they're making redundancies, they're redeploying those staff to their competitors and working together and saying, okay, well, yes, we've all bidded for the same projects, we've won certain projects, but now how can you utilise our project teams so they stay employed? And that's never been done before. In the GFC, it absolutely wasn't done. In the GFC, the mindset was very much holding on to what is theirs and being very protective over IP and over staff and employees, treating them as numbers and commodities. Whereas with this crisis, the humanitarian crisis that we're in, we're seeing that companies are working together. And that takes courage, that takes bravery. Because we're taking the ego out of the leadership. That a CEO of one company who's won a tender, a project, isn't better than the CEO of the other company because they haven't. And so they come together and they work as a team. And that is true courage and bravery. Because it's connected to the heart. It's not about the numbers. It's not about the metrics. It's about each of those individuals and their survival. They have families to feed. So it's about putting the interests of their people first. And that's what a true purpose for profit model is. It's putting your people first. Empathetic leadership. What does that look like? So seeing your cognition and your sense of feelings of others and emotions. Listening, understanding the emotion, taking the time to listen to others' needs, relating to pain, angst, jealousy, whatever it is, They're all human emotions. We are all human beings in the same human experience. Feeling, the empathy is expressing your care, acting on someone's needs. So I want you to think about yourself as a leader. When was the last time you may have seen one of your employees going through a difficult time, and with the world's going through a difficult time at the moment, so there should be many examples that spring to mind. But when was the last time that you saw, you listened, and then how did you act? It's going back to that Venn diagram of company culture. It's not just your vision, your mission, your values, your beliefs. It's then the policies around that, the behaviours, the thinking, the attitudes, but finally it's the action. So what I'm asking you, what action have you taken? And I'd like you to write that down. Because it's one thing to have your purpose on the wall, have your values on the wall, and know that you stand by them, but it's another thing to be actualising that and to be able to say, yes, my employees are my number one priority, above and beyond profit, meaning above and beyond my clients. And how have I proven that? What have I done that speaks to that? Have I dipped into my own bottom line to ensure that those employees are well looked after? When they've come and they've needed time off for mental health and well-being, have I given it to them? When they ask for flexibility, have I given it to them? Have I not only allowed it, but have I supported them? Have I been proactive in making that happen? Or have I done it with resentment? So what kind of leader are you? Are you a defensive leader? One that likes to hold on to what's theirs or what you believe is yours? Are you one that likes to keep everything close to your chest? Do you feel threatened by some of the employees in your team? Do you feel threatened that they may perhaps know more than you? Are they a threat to your position? Are they a threat to your knowledge base and your ego, your clients? Do you worry that they might take off with your top fee-paying clients? And so you hold on to IP and information, and you hold on to tasks, and you're not truly open with them through fear that you might lose something in a financial way. Or are you an offensive leader? One with wholeheartedness. Do you value that wholeheartedness? Are you an empathetic leader, an authentic leader who's acutely aware of what your strengths are and your areas of improvement? And are you actively working towards that? Are you surrounding yourself by teams and individuals that know what you don't? Or by ones that you feel less threatened by, or your ego feels less threatened by? When you show deep empathy towards others, their defensive energy goes down and positive energy replaces it. That's when you can get more creative in solving problems. And that's a really great slide to leave with, because without that creativity, without that energy, without that spark, it isn't sustainable. It's an empty feeling. There's no meaning. So part of being a purposeful leader and a leader of the future is embracing that, embracing the heart, embracing the vulnerability, the openness, the empathy, and empowering yourself and your teams and the stakeholders and everyone in your organisation on that same journey with you. So if you take anything away from today, perspective and empathy work hand in hand. Offensive leadership is the way forward. Leading with the heart is leading with purpose. Empathy humanises you. It connects the many layers of people. Empathy allows understanding. Perspective leads to rational and calm decision making. And perspective provides clarity. Thank you so much for listening today and taking the first step on your journey to being a human, purposeful leader. And I certainly welcome any questions. If anyone wants to put any questions in the chat box, if Kate wants to read those out, I'm more than happy to answer any. Otherwise, if you prefer to ask a question privately, then would love to connect with you via LinkedIn. So please send through any questions that you have via LinkedIn.
And just a reminder to everyone to pop in their LinkedIn details in the chat box. And yes, as Jennifer said, we've got a couple of minutes for questions. But Jennifer, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. It was so interesting. I mean, I feel like you touched on so much, and I feel like we're all going to kind of enter into this, this new phase with a lot more heart. That's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
Please reach out if you have any questions or need any further guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you tell us where we can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So through LinkedIn, if you just search Jennifer McMahon, so McMahon, or Modern People. Our website address is modernpeople.com.au. So quite simple to find us. So please reach out. We've got all of our contact details on there, all of our services, and we're more than happy to help with any requests that you have.
Beautiful. Well, everyone, have a wonderful night and look forward to seeing you online again soon. Thanks, everybody. See ya.